The moment is here, you can stop your search. It's Comics by Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch. Got this mail here. Hello Perch, I was watching your video with Joe on The Punisher, and you mentioned that Steve Orlando was hoping his Scarlet Witch series would reach issue 10. He tweeted that. Kind of made the comment of like the industry's down overall. It has been a wild transformation over the last year and a half, where there was a lot of very, for lack of a better word, it's very egotistical clowning on people, saying, comics are doing better than ever. There's like, everything is great. The industry is amazing. And then suddenly it's, oh shit, I don't think comics can get to issue 10. The industry is actually bad everywhere. And it says, I've seen some people post like the bottom completely dropped out. It didn't completely drop out. This is one of those cases where if you just talk to retailers and see what's going on, it was never amazing and strong. You did have retailers who were saying like, oh my God, I'm selling comics. Thank God my shop can open because it had to be closed for 4 months due to COVID. And they were very happy it was open. And you did have some retailers who had been dragging their feet and resisting doing any kind of online sales because comics just ain't sold that way. And so they were like, yeah, we're making money online. Yeah, you and everybody else because nobody can go outside. But none of that was the industry was doing great. And it just kind of blows my mind. Again, business sense and comics have never been good friends. But this is one of those areas where the answer is right in front of you. Really easy to get. Barely an inconvenience, you might say. And yet people just don't. I could go on and on this topic. I've talked to, I used to send data to the people who were at Newsarama. And I'm like, hey, here's a Facebook group you can join. It's got 85 retailers in it. They're willing to have you in there. And you could ask questions, what's selling, what's not. It's like, no, thank you. I have my own sources. Their own sources were 4 comic shops. 4. And somehow those 4 represented the entire state of the industry. Everybody. It's like, I understand everything that's going on with 4 people. This is just bad journalism. But more than that, it's just bad common sense. It's I'm not going to tip over into it because it'll just trigger everybody again. But it's kind of like people who say, I understand the nuance, depth, and financial mechanics of ESGs because I listen to pro wrestling channels and they talk about them sometimes on those. Not the best place to get that information. I always try and put in, analogies people will at least hopefully appreciate. It's like, if you were getting heart surgery and you wanted to know a little bit about, what the recovery time was going to be like, there's lots of places you could go to. Physical therapy, you could go to your doctor, certainly. You could read medical journals if you wanted to numb yourself into sleep. You could, there's lots of different places, different legitimate places with people who probably could give you a good information. Or alternatively, you could go to Reddit or 4chan and go to a message board for Warhammer and ask that audience, what should I do if I'm getting heart surgery? Now, you might get some people who have opinions, but the chances of you getting expert opinions pretty low. But I digress. Anyway, back to this mail. I went over to Twitter to see for myself the mail. Okay, let me start over here. It says, I was watching a video with Joe on The Punisher, and you mentioned that Steve Orlando was hoping his Scarlet Witch series would reach issue 10. I went over to Twitter to see for myself and saw he was bragging about where the book was on the ICV2 sales chart, number 13 and number 8, I believe. My question for you is, how much stock do you put into these sales rankings from ICV2? Do they hold any value at all, or should they be discarded completely? The short answer is I hold almost no value to them. And they're informative for one way, and they're often informative what you call in kind of a business world or financial world directionally, meaning this gives you a basic sense of what the popular titles in the line are and where they rank against other titles for the same publisher. But in terms of the actual kind of units and that kind of stuff, it, many of you may disagree with this. Um, I don't, but I think everybody will disagree with this depending on what camp you're in. I don't trust those numbers. I don't trust them because the data is not easy to obtain. It's not being produced and and publicly given out like it has in the past, where you could go to like Comic-Con and you could get actual numbers reported from Diamond, and you could kind of sort it out that way, and it gave you fairly close sense of what was being sold to retailers. It still wasn't ideal because, of course, you didn't know what was being sold through to customers. But from the publisher perspective, sold to retailers equals the money they're going to get. So that number, of course, matters to them quite a big deal. But through COVID, when Diamond left, or when DC left Diamond, Lunar kicked up, Marvel went over to Penguin Random House, kind of all these other things. The numbers got just silly. They got, I guess I'll say it in a more generous way. They got directional, and they got to be estimates. And in many cases, the strength of the numbers resulted from the amount of source they had. And in a lot of cases, the sources were, 50 stores or 100 stores, which, while interesting, were not really indicative of anything. I think I've done videos in the past talking about Comic Hub. Comic Hub is a point of sale system. It's a digital system. It's it's comic software that sort of, its purpose is to track the comics they're being sold in the shop and provide a network where people could, in theory, kind of horse trade and other things, what's going on with the books. But it hasn't been adopted widely. And it hasn't been adopted widely primarily because many shops don't want to change. They don't want to share their numbers, paranoia that if they share their numbers in some way, they'd be giving away trade secrets. Lots of reasons why it hasn't been adopted. But when sites like ICV2, Comic Run, others started using Comic Hub data as their data, it just basically meant the sample size of what they were getting were now estimates. They basically said, okay, we know what the history looked like, and therefore we can kind of take this limited set of data, and we could use history as our guide, and we can project fairly close what these sales are going to be like. It's not a bad theory, and I've said in the past, John Jackson Miller and what he does over there, I think he is not a clown in terms of the numbers he produces. I think he's got good intelligence, and he's coming up with legitimate reasons for what he's doing. I think he's solid at what he does. However, any good statistician or mathematician would tell you if you don't have solid data to begin with, your platform is shaky. And on top of that, COVID did hit and change buying behavior and change selling behavior significantly. And so those projections might not be as accurate as they normally would be. So, all of these things kind of combine to say, things are pretty different, anyway, very, very different. So, the long-winded way of saying I don't really trust it. Now, the part that I think may make other people angry, it's not, when I say I don't trust it, it's not because I think there's a grand conspiracy to trick and fool people. I think it's like I said, the data is not there. People are doing the best they can with it. I think some of the people who have taken the numbers and run with it, who have bragged on Twitter, talked about how things are better than they've ever been, and they've done it to own the chuds. Those people are clearly fools, and hubris is going to be a interesting factor in their life. But I don't believe that any of this is being done intentionally just screw with people. Now, if you're talking about other sources of the news media, if you're talking about Rich Johnston, if you're talking about Ivy McDonald, people like that, for sure there's collusion. There's a lot of like silly childish games that get played on people for sure. But in terms of the numbers, there's not an intent to mislead. In fact, and one of the reasons why I'd point to that clearly is that they're not hiding where they're getting the numbers from. They're not hiding the fact that they're doing estimates. if you look at, it's not even really the fine print, but they basically show their math in terms of how they get there. If people don't understand the method that they're using, that's not really their fault. They're doing the best they can. They're trying to put that together some data for you to look at. In most normal industries where people aren't all wound up with it, directional data is helpful. It basically gives us, something to talk about, something to think about, and that's a good thing. But that's comics. So I don't know. I don't trust it. I think it's interesting as a perspective of where things are going. I still find it wild that we went from comics are doing better than they have in 20 years to the entire industry has fallen apart. And only a fool would tell you that it actually went down that way. That's in general, businesses do not magically collapse overnight. Without some kind of inciting event, and there wasn't one like that here. Anyway, what do you think? Do you trust these numbers? What do you get to them? Do you like directional information, or do you just, it's like it needs to be 100% accurate or nothing? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for listening.